these tools and the widespread use of AI have, if anything, and maybe this is a more optimistic view, if anything, cemented to some degree or solidified or reminded everyone of just the importance of original reporting and writing.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Media Coffee, a podcast by Cision and PR Newswire. I'm your host, Sami Saad, and joining me today is Josh Scott, an award-winning reporter at BetaKit. BetaKit is a prominent Toronto-based publication covering Canadian and startups and tech innovation. Josh has written more than 1,000 news articles and investigative reports on topics from funding to acquisitions, IPOs, layoffs, product launches, lawsuits, and much more stories shaping Canada's technology and startup industry. Josh, I'm really excited to talk to you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, man. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you thinking of me for this. Yeah, I'm doing well. Doing okay with the heat. Busy as always, as probably any journalist would tell you today.
Yeah. Busy is always good, and it's a pleasure to have you on. And I'm really appreciative of your time. I want to start with, talking about your background in journalism. Can you tell us, the story of, how you got into journalism and what drew you into the tech industry specifically?
Sure, happy to do that. So I knew I was always interested in reading and writing. Funnily enough, I was interested in it was either journalism or creative writing. So I did some short fiction, some poetry back when I was in school. My undergrad, I went to University of Toronto, studied English, literature, philosophy, writing, and rhetoric. I did that thing, did a lot of writing, realized that, funnily enough, journalism was the more practical choice. I also ran one of those school papers there. And so I realized I wanted to get into journalism, was also very conscious of where the industry was heading. Obviously a lot of cuts. The industry's a lot smaller than it was even 5 years ago, let alone 10 or 20. And so the bet on my side was I told myself, I was like, I'm interested in business journalism. I kept hearing from people in the industry that go into business journalism, there are opportunities here. I told myself enough times that I was interested in it. Uh, I practiced it. I realized I was actually interested in it. And I was also interested in tech, I think from the perspective that every company, it was a very practical choice in that, like, I think if I knew how to write about tech, I'd have a lot of opportunities, but also every company that isn't a tech company is increasingly leveraging tech. Tech is becoming ever present in our lives and really forming the way we live, conduct business. And so I figured if I could learn how to report at the intersection of business and tech, I'd have more doors open to me than not. And at least so far that's played out. And on the business journalism side, like the bet was pretty simple in that, like, I think the models and the players might change, and frankly frequently do, but on a certain level, people will always be willing to pay for good, timely business information and reporting. And so that's sort of where I've tried to situate myself. And just by doing that, I've fallen in love with covering tech, writing about business, writing about startups in particular. Yeah, so that's kind of the story in brief.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And startups is like the intersection of tech and business, so it makes perfect sense. Um, I mentioned earlier a few topics that you've covered in your articles, but what are the topics or the type of stories that you're most interested in writing about? Whether that's in startups or business.
Good question. One I often get asked, and frankly, I should probably have a better answer to this. I think a whole bunch of things. Like I'm a reporter through and through. So if I get the chance, I jump at the opportunity to to break news, like to be the first on a big story. I jump at the opportunity to be the first to write about a company or a person doing something really interesting. Um, So everything from like a big deal to like just a company story that hasn't been told yet. That really excites me. I love writing about, I mean, we cover, so we sort of, our bread and butter at BetaKit is startups, but we cover like the full life cycle. So like we'll cover a public company like a Shopify to like a startup that was formed a month ago and is doing interesting things. I really like writing about the startup side. There's a cool, we're more of a community publication than I think a lot of other folks in the space. I'm like very much a tech beat reporter, and I feel like just having a deep sense of what's going on in the space and building relationships with people so that I can be like it's funny because often I'm like the first journalist period that many entrepreneurs speak to. And there's a lot of trust building involved in that, and relationship building, and I find that really satisfying. So I know that's probably a pretty vague answer, but um, yeah, I cover kind of all sectors, all types of companies. I just really jump at the chance to tell a really interesting story and give it the time and attention it deserves. And I'm a reporter through and through, so I love breaking news, exclusives or scoops.
Yeah, no, that's thanks for sharing. I the startups is a very interesting topic, yeah, right? Because I worked on the PR side and worked with startup companies and pitched reporters like yourself. But one of my favorite things about it was learning the technology and how they're applying it, what's the use case. And I want to talk to you about your editorial process a little bit more later. But before that, I want to get your perspective on the media landscape right now in Canada, specifically in tech. In the last, 5 years since the AI, just blew up, and what has changed in the landscape, the media landscape, and how has it affected your reporting?
Another great question. And to contextualize my answer, like I've been at BetaKit for 6 years, just over 6 years now. Started as an intern while I was doing my Master of Journalism at Ryerson, now Toronto Metropolitan University. And so I've only been in the industry for 6 years, so that's all I can really speak to. Um, there aren't a lot of people, like the bet initially was that there weren't a lot, like part of the bet initially for me was there weren't a lot of people covering tech. And that hasn't really changed much. There are only a few publications that are really dedicated to covering tech, and then there are reporters at larger publications who specialize specifically in tech, who know the industry really well. And so there aren't a lot of national publications. We have some regional publications as well, which depends on what your priorities are. You might either want to go national or regional. Um, there aren't a lot of players. There weren't a lot of players when I started. There aren't a lot of players now. There are some newer players coming into the space. There are people who, there's some people who kind of dip their toes into tech. There are people who know the industry a bit better. Obviously, BetaKit and myself would be part of the latter group.
Mhm.
In terms of how AI has changed things, obviously a lot of reader interest and company interest in AI. I'm getting more AI pitches, AI related pitches than ever before, including like pitches about companies doing things with AI and then very clearly AI generated PR
Mm,
pitches. So that's been
right.
interesting. I feel like AI
Yeah.
has also made it easier for people to do that thing where they launch spammy websites that basically copy whole hog my entire reporting and repost it.
Yeah.
As a
Oh,
business model, which is
yeah.
really crappy. So I don't know, that's kind of changed things to that degree. I feel like depending on the publication and the policies and the people, some people are using a little more AI in their work than others. I'm not using it a ton myself. I use it sometimes as like an initial research or brainstorming tool, but that's kind of the extent of that. So I don't know if that speaks I hope that speaks
Yeah.
to kind of the angle a bit, and happy to dive in deeper anywhere you'd like.
Well, that's a perfect segue to my next question about your editorial process. But before I ask you about that, so what I'm understanding is the AI kind of made it a little bit difficult. Am I understanding correctly? Has it made it harder for you to report? Did it affect anything in your reporting?
I don't think it has at all. I think actually no. Let me catch that. So it has in that I think we have to be a little more conscious now. It's a small but important thing of when I send email questions to folks, to what degree the responses that I'm getting are generated by AI. That's a continual process that we need to evaluate. The same for pictures. Like our policy is not to publish pictures that have been doctored with AI, and it could be as simple as like just a founder photo that's been super polished up using various tools. So that's I
Mhm.
say it's made things slightly more difficult, or maybe just added to the checklist, the reporting checklist, in that respect. It's also tougher, like just I think you're probably feeling this as well. Just there's a lot of we're seeing covering tech specifically, we're seeing more of this than anywhere else, where you get like the online essays that go viral. Um, to what degree those things are entirely AI written, and kind of distinguishing between like the slop that no one's put any time or attention into uh versus like what's actually reading. It's a little tougher these days. But I'd say on the general like journalism and reporting side, I feel like these tools and the widespread use of AI have, if anything, and maybe this is a more optimistic view, if anything, cemented to some degree or solidified or reminded everyone of just the importance of original reporting and writing. Um, as far as like on one level, like people always ask me, oh, when will AI replace my job? Um, I don't see a future where AI could build the relationships that I build with people, and the trust that I build with people to get them to tell me the things that they do. And that's kind of, I think, in the world of AI, especially when all these systems are just are really pulling and so heavily relying on the people actually doing the work. Uh, the importance is clear. Hopefully, we can find the models and the places to do it,
Yeah,
so that
I
we
want to
can
ask you.
continue to have that kind of work.
It's very interesting. I wanted to go back to what you were saying a little bit about how you receive like AI pitches and AI written content answers to your question. How do you check for that? How do you have specific tools like AI detection tools, or do you and do anything else to like verify that information? It's or you know if it's AI written or not.
Yeah, that's something we're thinking about more and more. I feel like we don't. I'm curious if where other publications are at on this. I don't know that we have a set process so much as we're keeping an eye out for that sort of stuff, and in some cases when we're not sure, like leveraging different tool, like playing around with different tools to see like whether to check whether a picture is AI
Mhm.
generated or comments are AI generated. I mean, the easiest tell is always when you've spoken to the person and then you're getting the written responses, and the gap between what they sound like in spoken conversation relative to what they sound like written is so large that that's a very clear tell. So those are some of the ways. We don't have a set process yet, um, where it's always evolving, but we just try to be conscious of that and play around with different tools when necessary.
Yeah, for sure. And then now, can we talk a little bit about your editorial process? Just can you describe to me what your day to day looks like? You know, how when you start your day, do you go on social media first, like to check what's going on? Do you check your emails first? Obviously, I'm sure you check it. And then what else? What are your other sources or like, things that you do to come up with story ideas to write your next article?
Mm. It varies a lot. I'll start with maybe kind of a standard day. Like obviously this would be completely blown up if, say, I'm reporting at an event or there's like a massive breaking story that overrides everything else. Like this, obviously a different situation. But on say a standard day, I start. Usually I try to do some reading before work if I'm up early enough because uh, there's days are so busy. We're a small team covering the whole country. I've got to file a lot of stories, so I don't usually have time to do the kind of more enterprising or like open-ended reading I'd like to do. So I try to do that a little bit before work. I come into work, usually what I'm doing first is reviewing my inbox, coming up with like reviewing it for pitches. And when I say inbox, I guess inboxes, I'm talking my email, my LinkedIn, my Twitter DMs, my texts, anything
Hmm.
I kind of anything I've received through any of those channels. I'm kind of feeding that into a list of pitches that then we kind of do at our daily meeting around 10 a.m. and we or at 10 a.m. and we talk through like what makes sense. So usually that first hour is filled with that. Sometimes I'll have a specific story assignment that I'm like balancing alongside that. I say sometimes actually increasingly often it'll be like I'll do that work and then um I'll also like be polishing up another story or finishing something else. Sometimes an interview as well. And then yeah, basically we do our 10 a.m. meeting. We talk through what makes sense for the day. I'm also like continually feeding in stuff I'm getting throughout the day, but a little less frequently. We kind of do like a mass dump in the morning and then unless if we get a pitch midday and it's nothing crazy, it usually waits till the next morning. And then following that 10 a.m. meeting, I basically have my day's assignments. I check out, I sign off and I execute on them. And then usually it's like I'm working on anywhere between 2 and 5 different stories in a day, and probably filing ideally 2 to 3. Um, Ideally
And
filing 2 to 3. Maybe I'm editing some, maybe I'm doing
mhm.
interviews for future stories. It's a lot of like it's a lot of context switching and a lot of like fitting the puzzle pieces together.
And how far ahead do you plan for these articles to publish? Or does that
Um,
vary
it
as well?
it varies a lot.
Yeah.
So like if there's, for instance, if we get a pitch about like we love to have as much warning as possible when people pitch us on news, just so we can kind of slot everything into our editorial calendar a little more neatly. We love to have ideally as much warning and some flexibility on the company side, especially if like they're working with us on an announcement. So we can kind of make sure we fit everything in a smart way. So what that means in many cases, like at least give us a week. The pitches, the amount of times I get pitched on some interesting news the day before, like the afternoon before, it can be frustrating. But yeah, it depends. Like sometimes we'll get something, we're interested in it, but we need to see like it's not going to be announced for a little bit. We need to circle back on that closer to that date and see what else we have going on to see if it's still a fit. Other times it's like we get pitched on big enough news or we have a big investigative story or something we're working on that we know it's planned and it's more a question of like we're working towards that or we're fitting in the work that needs to be done towards that as we go. And usually it's like a healthy mix of like we've got to cover the news that our audience, which is largely people who work at tech companies, people who are building tech companies, so entrepreneurs, people who are funding tech companies, investors, government folks, just folks deeply embedded in the Canadian tech ecosystem. We've got to make sure we're like balancing the kind of core news they expect from us, but also the more enterprising kind of original reporting. So it's always it's definitely a very there definitely varies to a large degree.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. It's very, very useful to know. Let's talk about press releases for a little bit. What's your attitude towards press releases? What elements of the press release grab your attention right away?
Um, Press releases. I mean, we get a lot of a lot of the news, a lot of the kind of daily news we're covering that we aren't pitched in advance, we'll be getting because we see an interesting press release cross the wire. Um, Press releases are really helpful for me as a reporter because they're not necessary. So like I love like a true exclusive where a company has some news they share with us. Our story serves as the announcement. Press releases are still really useful as just a check on how the company is framing the news, a check on like kind of core details. Like they're laid out in a clear way. And then also just like how the company, in many cases, I'm like, we have to describe companies doing very interesting things with technology uh, that are very tough to describe, and we don't ever get to actually use the technology. So we've got to rely heavily on how they describe it, and that comes in an interview, that comes in the press release as well. So like having clear descriptions there can be really helpful. In terms of what grabs us, like there's usually got to be if we're covering something from a press release, there needs to be a clear news hook. We get pitched all the time, especially in startup land, on a company. This company is trying to do this thing, and what they're doing and how they're doing it could be super interesting. But for us to cover, especially press release, it's got, especially something that's already been announced, there's got to be a strong news hook in terms of in many cases, it's this company has raised this money, this company has acquired this other company, this company has these specific hiring plans, like kind of a specific stat or milestone uh, that needs to be like that's kind of primarily what we look for. I feel like generally, I feel like for the most part, the most interesting stuff we're getting is from the conversations we have, like the interviews, the speaking with people around the thing. But the usually if we're reviewing press releases, we're trying to see if there's been a specific milestone and whether also clearly this is another kind of thing we've always got to piece together is like whether the company is actually Canadian because we cover Canadian tech companies specifically and many are vague about where they are actually based. So yeah, those are maybe a few points I look for, but happy to dig into anything else there if it's interesting.
Yeah, no, this is brilliant. Yeah, I would want to know also about what kind of press releases that you just automatically say no to. What do you wish organizations or companies would stop sending you, if that makes sense? Like, just automatic no, this type of news, we don't care about this. Are there anything any specific topics or any types of releases like that? Or
Yeah,
you could say pitches as well.
I feel like I would say, yeah, if it's okay with you, I'll extend this to pitches more broadly because
Yeah, for sure.
I have some helpful thoughts there. I don't think
Hmm.
there's anything we automatically dismiss, but I will say there are like a few one recent example, for instance, might be we are getting more reports on AI than ever before, than reports period or reports on anything else I think I've ever seen. Like I'm probably getting pitched anywhere between like 5 and 10 reports on AI per day, on an average day, like average weekday. And so given the sheer volume, I'm a little less interested in general in those reports. And for us to make the leap to actually covering them, there needs to be something really insightful, and fresh and new. Generally when I get like we're most interested, I actually don't want to speak for all of us. I'm most interested in news I can work with the company to break. So, for instance, if a company, usually in tech, the way it works is different from a lot of other industries. These entrepreneurs are so focused on building their businesses that the PR and the media side, many cases they're going direct to us without an intermediary. Sometimes they have an intermediary, but the PR strategy is like almost an afterthought, or it's the lowest on the lowest item on the to-do list, or the last item on the to-do list. And so because of that, many times companies will do a really interesting thing and then just they're so excited it's done. They want to get it out there as soon as possible. They push that release out. We're inherently a little less interested in covering that sort of news because there's just less built-in reader interest in us writing about a thing that's already been publicly announced versus a company working with us to help us dig into the really interesting thing they're doing, coordinating on timing, putting both of those out together. So I'd say that's one thing. In terms of a pitch, how I get pitches, two things I'll put out there for any PR people listening. I strongly prefer, I would love to filter as many of the pitches I get as possible through email, especially if they're not super sensitive stuff. It's tough sometimes to manage like, oh, what am I getting through well, it's always Twitter to me. Through Twitter DMs, what am I getting through LinkedIn DMs? What am I getting through text, phone call? Like, if it can be clearly laid out in an email, it makes the process of me pitching my editor on it and the likelihood of us covering just a little greater. So I try to filter that through, and I say that because sometimes like what really bugs me is getting phone calls from PR people I've never spoken to or don't have a relationship with to pitch me stories because
Yeah.
the reality is I've got to cover so many, and the same is true of all my colleagues. We've got to cover so many stories. We're so busy. We can only commit to conversations, one, with people we have deep relationships with already that we trust, and two, with people about stories that we know we're actually pursuing. So I try to keep a kind of initial communications all through email. I'd say another thing that's really that I find really helpful is a super clear subject line on what the news is. I think sometimes sometimes the story framing, like a more narrative framing, can be helpful. But if I have to really, given the volume of pitches we get, if I have to really dig to find out what the actual news is, it's the likelihood of us covering that or me getting to that point is just a little lower than if like I'm getting a very clear pitch with a clear subject line, a couple of quick bullet points on like, here's what's happening, here's why we think it matters, here's what we can offer you, like interview with this person, or like if there's an exclusive at play, an exclusive, that sort of thing. I find those are usually the likelihood of
Right.
you getting a story in BetaKit is higher if you can do those things. If you make us
Mhm.
really work to figure out the story and the core details, or you're really annoying,
Mhm.
follow-ups over email are fine, but just the calls for me personally, at least, the calls from people I don't know are irritating, especially when I'm on a tight deadline for other stories and I have like no wiggle room.
Right. Yeah.
Uh, those are some
Yeah.
of the things I look for and would love to see more of.
Oh, no, that's perfect. And yeah, I mean, you have to earn your way to that phone call, right? You can't just start with the phone call and expect,
Yeah.
positive feedback always.
It's mainly a time consideration for me. Like I'm just on a
Yeah.
tight schedule on any given
Yeah.
day, and a 10-minute phone
Hmm.
call can sometimes derail things significantly on
Right.
my end, especially if it's just an exploratory thing. Like if it were
Right.
up to me, I'd love to just be chatting with possible sources and
Yeah.
more frequently, but I've just got to be it's
Hmm.
we've got to publish a lot of stories, we've got to cover a lot of things. I've got to be really ruthless with my time, and so
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
just
for sure. Yeah, 100%. And it's also preference too. I mean, you have to say each person, journalists have their own working style. But yeah, that's very good to know. And I really appreciate all those great points that you shared. I wanted to just to quickly follow up. So when a company sends you a press release, is it okay if they follow up on the press release? Do you mind that? Or when do you think they should follow up? How many days should they give until from the first email?
Uh, Another great question. For me, like happy with email follow-ups. Like sometimes there might be like my inbox is so crowded some days that sometimes I might not see the thing until the first follow-up. Like it might have just slipped past my radar. Um, so I'd say follow-ups are fine. I feel like one or two follow-ups generally the sweet spot. As long as they aren't super passive aggressive, that's fine because sometimes it can just be a question of me seeing the story versus not. Um, I would say also like Yeah, I don't know. I'd say kind of those follow-ups are. Oh, this was the point I was going to make. I think, and I think I can speak for most journalists in this respect. It's hard, it's sometimes harder for us, I think, because we're a bit more of a community publication and the expectations are maybe a little bit different. But I think a healthy understanding on the part of PR people that there are so few journalists, especially relative to the amount of people working in PR and communications, and the volume of pitches is just so great that the simple reality is I'm not able to respond to all the pitches I get. I promise all the people who pitch me repeatedly because it's true. I read through all of them and I send through the ones we're interested in, and it might result in like a colleague reaching out and doing a story. It might result in me following up. If it's a company we're really interested in, I try to follow up and be like, "Hey, this isn't a fit, but keep me posted. Like, I want to stay up to date on what you're doing." But I think what's always appreciated is a healthy understanding on the part of PR folks that like we've seen the thing. If we haven't gotten back, if you followed up, especially multiple times and we haven't gotten back to you, it's just not a fit and we're not interested. It's nothing personal. It's just I can't spend my entire day responding to the 150 pitches I get.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And that's pretty reasonable to me. Um, Final thoughts. Do you have any advice to share with, up and coming journalists entering the tech space, especially maybe if you want to talk to like the Canadian journalists entering the space? You mentioned earlier there's not a lot of players, and so for those who are joining in, do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, happy to speak to that. I mean, keep in mind, I'm still very early in my career and I've only done a very specific thing, although I have done it very well, I, I think. Don't dismiss business journalism. I think what I said earlier is still true, and it's reflected in just the amount of journalists I've come up with who've ended up, whether they initially planned to or not, ended up in business journalism. The amount of jobs available, um, is just like it's a growing although the overall field is shrinking, it seems like the business reporting and business journalism side is growing. And perhaps the tech side is as well, hopefully. Um, yeah, I'd say I wouldn't dismiss that. Know how to report on businesses. And if you know how to do that, you can report on a lot of other things and you can tell really interesting stories that other people won't be getting if you know how to do that. I'm in an interesting spot where I went like basically straight to beat reporter. I feel like the general journalism career path is like you start as general if you're a reporter, you start as general assignment, you eventually specialize, you learn how to cover a bunch of things, you decide what you like, and where there's opportunity, you specialize. I'm really happy with the path I chose. It's really satisfying, really deeply understanding an industry and feeling like I really have a good pulse on what's going on and having deep relationships across that. So I wouldn't dismiss just specializing early because I feel like I'm now at a point where I could either port, I could either take the expertise I've built elsewhere, or I could move into potentially a new beat and I now know how to be a beat reporter at least, even if I don't understand be a beat reporter and be a business reporter, even if I don't understand the other beat. Maybe the other thing, jumping around a bit here, but like also don't be dismissive of joining a small publication. I know in Canada, at least a lot of people are like the goal or the dream is, hey, I wanna work for the Globe and Mail, or I want to write for the Toronto Star, or I want to work for CBC. At a small publication, I think had I started at a larger publication, I don't think I would have been able to do as many of the things that I was able to do with BetaKit over the past 6 years. And I wouldn't have been exposed to all the different parts of the process and how the business actually works as much. And so obviously it was very, very hard work because we cover startups. We're a bit of a startup ourselves. Um, lots of times wearing many hats. Dare I say too many hats at certain points, but I was able to learn and pick up so much more than I would have been able to anywhere else, which I feel like puts me in a great position for the rest of my career. So I'd say don't be dismissive of the smaller pubs. Don't be afraid to specialize early, especially if you think you're interested in that beat, and don't dismiss business journalism. There are opportunities.
Thank you so much, Josh, again for joining me today. This has been a very fascinating and very extremely useful conversation, and really appreciate your insights that you shared. This is going to be very useful to, our audience, trying to understand and more deeply about how journalism works and what goes on in the day-to-day of a journalist's work. So I really appreciate you joining us, and thank you so much. Best of luck with everything in the future. Thank you, Josh.
Thanks, man. It was a pleasure chatting with you.